Old Testament prophecies that actually came true.
Imagine if you could predict the future. Would you buy a lottery ticket? Invest in the stock market? Hide in a bomb shelter? But only God knows the future. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth. Proverbs 27:1. So, when a prophet does predict the future, it's a miracle. According to J. Barton Payne's Encyclopedia of Biblical Prophecy, there are 1,239 prophecies in the Old Testament, 578 prophecies in the New Testament, for a total of 1,817 in the whole Bible. Some of these prophecies were fulfilled thousands of years ago. For example, the siege of Jerusalem, which took place in 587 BC, was predicted by Ezekiel 11 years before it happened. Turn your face toward the siege of Jerusalem, and with bared arm prophesy against her. Ezekiel 4:7. Similarly, Jeremiah predicted that the Babylonian captivity would last 70 years. The whole country will become a desolate wasteland, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Jeremiah 25:11. Jeremiah, who was already old when the Babylonian invasion took place, died long before the 70 years was up, but his prophecy came true nonetheless. A third amazing example of fulfilled prophecy in the Old Testament is the rebuilding of Solomon's temple in 516 BC. Who says of Cyrus, "He is my shepherd and will accomplish all that I please"? He will say of Jerusalem, "Let it be rebuilt," and of the temple, "Let its foundations be laid." Isaiah 44:28. Isaiah predicted the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the temple before they were even destroyed. He foretold the freeing of the Jewish captives before they were taken into captivity. He even mentioned the name of Cyrus long before he was even born.
So the big question we need to ask ourselves is, how did Isaiah, a mere mortal man, know what was going to happen hundreds of years after his death? How did he predict the future with such amazing accuracy? The answer is found in 2 Peter 1:20-21.
Above all, you must understand that no prophecy of Scripture came about by the prophet's own interpretation of things. For prophecy never had its origin in the human will, but prophets, though human, spoke from God as they were carried along by the Holy Spirit.
I put a Bible prophecy from Daniel chapter 2 in Leonardo AI, and this is what came out. But what is this?
This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Your Majesty, you are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind, and the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you rule over them all. You are that head of gold. Daniel further explains that each of the parts of the statue represent future kingdoms that are yet to come. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united, any more than iron mixes with clay. This is how these kingdoms appeared in history. The head of gold was Babylon. The chest of silver, the Medes and the Persians. Thighs of bronze, Greece. Legs of iron, Rome, which was divided. The head of gold was Babylon, with Nebuchadnezzar being its most powerful king. But after King Nebuchadnezzar's death, Babylon was conquered by Persia. Daniel lived to see this part of the dream fulfilled, even warning the new king, Belshazzar, of his impending doom. In Daniel chapter 5, Daniel describes the mysterious message written on the wall by a ghostly hand. This is the inscription that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel Upharsin. Here is what these words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. This prophetic message came true that very night. Armies invaded Babylon. Belshazzar was killed, and the empire of the Medes and the Persians took over. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Persia was represented by the chest of silver. This makes sense because Persia was an amazingly wealthy kingdom, albeit not as wealthy as Babylon. Eventually, the powerful empire of Media and Persia was usurped by the Greeks. The Greco-Persian War began in 499 BC and lasted about 50 years. By then, Persia had already begun a long decline as a world empire, but Greek culture and influence continued to grow, sweeping across the known world from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to India. As most people back then traveled with their legs, it's fitting that the Greeks would be represented by thighs of bronze. All of this took place hundreds of years after Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar were long since dead. So how could Daniel know what was going to happen unless God told him? The next part of the statue is even more fascinating. Daniel describes it as feet of iron, making it very strong. But it's not just one metal. It's also mixed with clay and divided into two parts. This is an amazingly accurate description of an empire and people that Daniel could not have imagined in his wildest dreams, because they did not even exist when he was alive. I'm talking about the Roman Empire, perhaps the most powerful and influential empire and culture in history. Hence, the iron. Iron as a weapon is stronger than gold, silver, or bronze. Part of Rome's overwhelming success as a military power was due to its mastery of iron weapon manufacturing. But Rome wasn't just iron. It was also clay. What did this mean? The Babylonians came from Babylon and were primarily one ethnic background. The same can be said about the Persians and the Greeks, so it makes sense to represent them with a single metal, i.e. gold, silver, bronze. But the Romans were different. They were a mixed people that came from many different countries. Even the Apostle Paul, who was born a Jew and proud of it, was also a Roman citizen, having been born in the Roman city of
Tarsus.
So the fourth kingdom was made of iron, mixed with clay. But it was also divided into 2 feet. The fascinating thing is that Rome indeed was divided into an Eastern and Western empire. Again, how could Daniel know that this was going to happen apart from divine inspiration? But the prophecy doesn't end there. Daniel saves the best for last. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. This blows me away because it so wonderfully knits the Old and New Testaments of the Bible together into one amazing, miraculous story. So far, we've only been talking about earthly kingdoms that come and go in history. But now, Daniel talks about a kingdom that will last forever. He talks about the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The rock that Daniel is describing is Jesus Christ. And drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. 1 Corinthians 10:4. According to Daniel, the rock would arrive in the time of those kings. And guess what? Jesus was born just as Rome was reaching its zenith of power. Eventually, Rome itself would become a Christian nation, at least in name. But the final fulfillment of this prophecy won't take place until the second coming, when Christ will set up his eternal kingdom. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his throne in heavenly glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world."
Nebuchadnezzar's amazing prophetic dream in Daniel 2 is corroborated by further visions in Daniel 7, 8, 11, and 12, each providing more amazing details that will be fulfilled in world history.
The predictions found in Daniel were so accurate and obviously miraculous that many skeptics refused to believe that Daniel was written by Daniel at all, or that a historical person named Daniel even existed. They argued that the book of Daniel was a fictional story written in Roman times, and maybe even in the Middle Ages, long after the events described had already occurred in history. But this theory was finally put to rest in the 1950s with the amazing discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran. Archaeologists discovered ancient copies of Daniel dating back to 220 BC, hundreds of years before Rome would conquer Jerusalem.
Daniel 2 isn't just amazing, it's a miracle. Have you heard of the prophecy of the 70 weeks in Daniel chapter 9? I didn't think so, and yet it is one of the most amazing miracles you will ever see.
Daniel had just been reading Jeremiah's prophecy about the 70-year captivity when he became convicted of his own sin and the sins of his nation. He prayed for God to forgive Israel and fulfill the prophecy he'd given to Jeremiah to rebuild the nation of Israel. I suppose that Daniel was worried that God wouldn't fulfill his promise. But our God is an amazing God. And just to prove it, he sent Daniel an angel to comfort him with these words.
Know and understand this. From the time the word, decree, goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, the Anointed One will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary.
Daniel wasn't just worried about himself. He was worried about his whole country. God comforts Daniel by telling him about a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. If Jerusalem was rebuilt, then Israel would survive as a nation. But God was bigger than all that. Not only did he reassure Daniel that Jerusalem would indeed be rebuilt, but also that the Anointed One would come. Daniel would have known that the Anointed One was the promised Messiah, the anointed king that would rule Israel forever. In this passage, God answers both concerns at the same time. The angel tells Daniel that the capital city of Israel, Jerusalem, will be rebuilt by royal decree. The decree that the angel is referring to is found in
Nehemiah 2, 7 and 8.
I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And may I have a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy. Knowing that Jerusalem was to be rebuilt by royal decree must have comforted Daniel, but that's only half the story. God also tells Daniel exactly when the Messiah will come. The angel says in verse 25, from the time the word decree goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. We know when this decree happens because the date is recorded in Nehemiah 2, 1a. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. According to historical records, this is 445 BC. But what is a 7? In order to understand the angel's message, we have to decipher the code. In ancient times, a week, or 7, would refer to 7 days or 7 years. So, which is it? Ezekiel 4:6. After you have finished this, lie down again, this time on your right side, and bear the sin of the people of Judah. I have assigned you 40 days, a day for each year. Numbers 14:34. For 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days. You explored the land. You will suffer for the sins and know what it is like to have me against you. So, let's do the math. 7 times 7 plus 62 times 7 equals 483 years. There should be 483 years between the decree to rebuild Jerusalem and the coming of the Messiah. Let's check that out in history. The decree was 445 BC. Christ died around 32 AD. Jerusalem was destroyed 40 years later. In the future, there will be a war, and then 7 years later, there will be the end of time.
The final week, or 7 years of history, is described in great detail in the Gospels and in the book of Revelation. But what is unique to Daniel is the precise calculation of years that precedes the coming of the Messiah, 483 years.
But hold on a second. It's not 483 years from 445 BC to 32 AD. It's only 476 years. If you put this in your calculator, you probably got
477.
But you have to remember that the Gregorian calendar just jumps from 1 BC to 1 AD. There's no 0. So what's going on? There was no Messiah in 41 AD. Don't worry, your math is just fine. It's just your calculation of years that's a bit different. In the modern calendar, there are 365 days in a year, but not always. Every 4 years, we add on an extra day because of the Earth's revolution around the sun isn't exactly 365 days. But the ancient Hebrews didn't do it that way. They allowed for 360 days in the year. Being a Hebrew prophet, that's how Daniel would have calculated it. So let's do the math again.
Okay.
360 days times 483 prophetic years comes out to 173,880 total days. If I divide those days by 365 days in our modern calendar, we get 476 years plus 24 days. Guess what? There are exactly 476 years and 24 days between the decree in Nehemiah 2 and Jesus' triumphal entry in 32 AD. As a mortal man, there was no way Daniel could have known when Jesus would come to the temple or be crucified or when the temple would be destroyed. He died 500 years before any of that happened. Daniel's prophecy wasn't just amazing, it was literally a miracle. Do you believe in miracles? I'd love to know what you think. Leave a comment and share this video with someone.